What's up, guys? It's your boy Kevin Savage, and today we're gonna look at 5 tips on how to make your drum groove sound better in Ableton. So let's hop in and check them out. Alright, so tip number 1, picking the sound. So not everyone has access to a bunch of sample packs, but if your drums sound weak, your groove is going to sound weak. There's a couple of different ways that you can go about fixing this. One of the ways would be processing the sounds that you already have, but you could also layer sounds. I went ahead and snagged some samples that I felt were a bit weaker in the Ableton stock library. So we can go ahead and take that kick and layer it with another kick that we took from the Ableton stock sounds together with some processing and some adjustments to the transient. We can go ahead and make our kick sound so much better. I went ahead on our first kick, I faded in the sample quite a bit, really chopping down that body so that we can go ahead and layer that second kick with it. So this is what it sounds like. Really cut down some of that aspect. I took this sample, I went ahead and reduced it by 8 decibels, faded in the transient and faded out the end. You can really hear that crunch at the end. Yeah, we don't want that. So I went ahead and dropped an EQ8, carved off the highs down to 337 hertz, as well as the lows up to 50 hertz, and this is what that sounds like. So together, this is what it sounds like. You know, let's throw a little bit of processing on that. I dropped a drum bus on here. And then to go ahead and glue everything together, I dropped a glue compressor. That really brings up the sound and kind of tightens everything together. Moving on to the snare. And you know, that's not a terrible snare, but I wanted to give it a little bit more body and crunch and really make it a more unique sound. So this is what it sounds like layered with the other snare that I pulled. I went ahead and trimmed off some of that tail. I faded it in a little bit, killing that transient because all I wanted was this kind of the center part right here. And then I went and found a snare. I went ahead and kept that transient, but I faded out some of that body. And this is what they sound like together without any processing. So it's pretty bright, but it's still also kind of got a mellowed out sound. I went ahead and dropped an EQ on it, cutting out the lows, and dropped a glue compressor on there. Now, moving on to the hats, we have our bright hat here. I went ahead and there's a little bit of empty space before the initial transient. So I pulled that where the sample begins up a little bit, as well as I faded in about 16.8 milliseconds and faded out at the end. This is what it sounds like now. This is what the click hat sounds like, which I cut that tail. This is what that sounds like. Now this hat is a little bit louder than the other hat, so what I went ahead and did also too is took down the volume. You know, it's important to balance the two together. Then I added in some processing, really cutting off the lows, and this is what the two sound like together. So finally for the crash, I just kind of kept it the way it is. So if you watch my last tutorial, see how you can really take almost any sound, animal sound, Foley, car sounds, into a drum kit. Tip number 2, give your groove body. Just like you add layers to your samples to make them more interesting, you can add layers to your groove to make it more interesting too. But for this video, what we went ahead and focused on is Foley and using reverse samples that you're already using in your track to make them sound better. So personally, I really like to use a reverse kick, but you can reverse almost anything and really layer it around in your groove. I went ahead and picked some Foley from a cymatic sample pack and went ahead and chopped up a couple ones that I really like. I also took the reverse kick that we already processed a little bit and went ahead and placed it in parts of the groove that I thought sounded better. So here's what our groove sounds like without the body. So that sounds pretty good, but we can make it sound better. This is adding in the reverse kick. And we went ahead and added in this Foley. So that just adds a little bit of character to the overall groove. Let me know in the comments below the craziest Foley samples that you've used in your track. Moving on to tip number 3, humanization. Even in genres like house and techno where the drums are highly quantized, humanization can really help your track and help your drum groove stand out. I went ahead and left a couple of articles in the description below that you can go ahead and check out. So let's first look at velocity. I think the place where this is most important, especially for this track, will be the hats. So let's go ahead and go into our MIDI. I'm going to go ahead and take this first sample. I'm going to leave it where it is, but I'm going to go ahead and take this second one. I'm going to bring it down a little bit. So we're at 62 over here. Let's bring it up to 43. All right, and let's adjust the third one a little bit too. Let's bring it down to like 54. So we've got one at 62, we've got the second one at 43, and the third one at 54. It kind of creates this little concave, I think that's the right word. And let's go ahead and reselect these again and duplicate them across the way, and we'll leave this last one the way it is. So what that does is that kind of keeps it from just going da, 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 da. What it used to sound like is this. We also have this thing called the groove pool. What it does is it allows you to adjust the timing for your MIDI. So let's go ahead and add that here. Without it, you can leave it where it is. You know, no one's going to judge you on that. But if you want, you can play with timing. Tip number 4, placing the sound. It's important to prevent the frequencies from clashing. This can be done with EQ, it can be done with panning, it can be done with reverb. So if we cut the lows specifically on like a snare, not only does that tighten up the snare, but that also provides space for the drums to live and breathe. So for this video, if we go ahead and look at the kick, we could see that the majority of the kick is living right here. What we want to do is we want to go ahead and make sure there's space for the snare. And we're going to go ahead and turn on 8 and pull that down a little bit. I still like a little bit of that end there. Now, if we go ahead and look at the snare, we can see how there's this space right here that's muddy. So let's add an EQ8 and let's take out some of the lows. So that snare is right there at about 196 hertz. Now you gotta be careful how high you cut because that can really thin out the sound. For the hats, we went ahead and really already cut a bunch of the hats up there. And then of course, keeping in the crash. I think for the crash, what we can go ahead and do is add in this EQ cut down here in the low end. So that's one aspect of making space. We're going to go ahead and move on to adding a little bit of panning. And what we went ahead and did was I panned the crash about 5 to the right and the hats about 5 to the left. You can take the snare and probably pull it a little bit to the left. The whole idea right here is by moving the sounds either to the right or to the left, you're kind of building that drum kit. So this is what it sounds like now. And this is what it sounds like without the panning. So that panning really does help kind of bring space to everything. Another important way of adding space to your overall groove is through reverb. Now, personally, I like using a reverb send. I think it's useful to control. I went ahead and routed the snare, the hats, and the crash all to a reverb send. So this is what it sounds like without it. And this is what it sounds like with it. Now, in order to make everything kind of sound even better, you can also add a side chain where you trigger where the kick and the snare hit with basically what's called a ghost note, and use sidechain compression your reverb send to go ahead and duck out so that you don't have the the snare bleed through, and it allows for your kicks and snares to really pop in your mix. So this is what it sounds like with the sidechain compression. Also keep in mind that it's really important to keep the same reverb throughout your song. This uniformity of reverb really allows for everything to sound really, really nice and not to give you a headache later on down the road when you're trying to mix the track. Now you can of course play with it. You can play with what kind of buses you're using, what kind of reverb buses. Perhaps you'll end up stumbling upon a little reverb trick that really sets you apart from the other producers out there. But I think what's really important, at least for what we're doing here, is to really keep a uniformity throughout your track. Finally, tip number 5 to make your drum groove sound better: cutting through a mix. Now this can be done with a couple of different ways. For this video, we're going to go ahead and use both saturation as well as side chains and a little bit of white noise to go ahead and help your samples cut through a mix. So what I went ahead and did was I went ahead and used a rectifier send. Now this rectifier is basically some saturation as well as some EQ and some compression over here to go ahead and add a little bit of grit and distortion to elements in your mix. So let's go ahead and add in our synth elements. I went ahead and just snagged a loop from a Cymatics signature sample pack, and this is what that sounds like. So I went ahead and routed a very small amount of this input signal from these instruments, the kick, snare, hat, and crash, to the rectifier send, because the rectifier send is a really powerful send. So this is what it sounds like with it. This is what it sounds like without it. It's so much more warm, and it really kind of makes it pop. I went ahead and dropped the kick and snare sidechain compression on this channel as well. That really helps us so when the kick hits and the snare hits, that the synth cuts out. Also, as I added a little bit of noise to the snare hits to really help them kind of cut through. It's just a very simple serum patch where I take the white noise oscillator and adjust the envelope so it's a very short little hit. And you could honestly even probably have it a little bit less, but I think this works for what we're trying to do right here. So this is what it sounds like layered on top of the snare with the rectifier send. And this is what it sounds like without. It's really, really, really subtle, but I think it can help really make the snare also cut through the mix. Alright, so I hope this tutorial was really helpful. There are also plenty of resources out there that can really help further explain the things that we did here, as well as other tips and tricks. I really like Attack Music Magazine's The Secrets to Dance Music Production. There's a lot of great pictures and images and charts and graphs. If you're interested, I went ahead and included a link where you can buy it below. Icon Collective also has some great resources, ADSR, and obviously YouTube. If these tips were useful for you, go ahead and drop a link to your SoundCloud where you went ahead and used these tips in the comments below, and I'll go ahead and swing through and check them out. I'll leave a couple of links in the description below. You can also join the Discord server. As always, make sure to check out the other videos that are here on this channel. Join me on Twitch at Kevin Savage NYC. Consider supporting me on Patreon. It's $5. With that, you get access to all my sample packs as they come out, as well as an exclusive channel in my Discord. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Drop me a message. If this video helped you out, go ahead and leave a comment below. Let me know which tip you liked the most. Ring that notification bell to stay updated, and we'll see you in the next video.